Steven Siegel walked into the bank like a man the world had forgotten, not because he looked weak, but because he looked poor. A faded brown jacket with frayed sleeves, old jeans, simple shoes with dust on them, no watch, no suit, no bodyguards, just calm eyes and a folded withdrawal slip in his hand. The moment he stepped into the line, something changed. People stared, not with admiration, with judgment. A woman whispered to her husband, "He looks like he's going to beg." Steven heard it, but he didn't react. He stood quietly until it was his turn. When he finally reached the counter, he slid his card and the withdrawal slip forward with one hand, polite and respectful. The teller glanced at it for half a second, then her face twisted into a smirk. She typed something quickly, then leaned back like she enjoyed what she was about to say. "Sir, this withdrawal isn't possible." Steven blinked slowly. "Why not?" he asked calmly. The teller looked him up and down, her eyes stopping at his worn shoes. Then she spoke loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "We don't give out large cash withdrawals to people without verification." Steven's voice stayed calm. "It's my account." The teller laughed softly. "Your account," she repeated, mocking him like it was a joke. She clicked something on her screen and shook her head dramatically. "I'm sorry, but this doesn't match your profile." A couple people in line chuckled. Steven inhaled quietly, still calm. "Can you check again?" he asked. The teller sighed like he was wasting her time. Then she grabbed a red stamp, and before Steven could even speak again, "THUMP," she stamped the slip rejected. Then she pushed it back toward him like it was trash. Steven stared at the stamp, not angry, not shocked, just quietly disappointed. A security guard immediately began walking toward him. Human explanation. You know what hurts the most. It's not being broke. It's being treated like you're worthless, just because you look broke. Steven slowly picked up the slip. He looked around the bank. Cameras in the corners, phones recording, faces watching. Then he looked back at the teller and asked softly, "Are you sure you want to humiliate me?" He paused, eyes calm but piercing. "On camera." The teller rolled her eyes. The security guard stepped right beside Steven, close, aggressive. "Sir," the guard growled, "step away from the counter." Steven didn't move. He just stood there calm, and that calm made the room feel dangerous. The security guard stood beside Steven like he was already guilty. "Sir," the guard said coldly, "step away from the counter." Now, Steven didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked calmly, "Why am I being treated like a criminal for requesting my own money?" The teller laughed under her breath, then looked at the people behind Steven as if she wanted them to enjoy the show. "Because," she said loudly, "this is how fraud starts." Steven's eyes narrowed slightly. "Fraud," he repeated. "You haven't even checked properly." The guard leaned closer, voice low and threatening. "Stop talking. Step aside." Steven remained calm, but he didn't move. He placed his ID card gently on the counter, right in front of the teller. "Check my identity," he said. "Then process the withdrawal." The teller picked up the card slowly like it smelled bad. She glanced at the name, and suddenly she smiled. Not a polite smile, a cruel one. "Oh my God," she said, laughing. "Guys, listen to this." She turned the ID toward the people in line like she was showing them a meme. "This man says his name is Steven Siegel," Lofter erupted. A man in the line chuckled. "Yeah, right." Another customer muttered, "These scammers are getting creative." Steven didn't flinch. He just watched them calmly. The teller shook her head dramatically. "Sir," she said, mocking him, "Steven Siegel doesn't walk into a bank wearing tagged." Steven answered calmly, "Steven Siegel also doesn't need to prove anything to you." That response made the teller's face harden. She grabbed his ID and, without thinking twice, she dropped it. Right onto the floor. Not an accident, a message. Steven looked down at the card on the floor. The guard smirked like he enjoyed it. A few customers gasped quietly. Steven slowly bent down, picked up the ID, and dusted it off like he was cleaning their disrespect. Then he looked at the teller again. "Was that necessary?" he asked softly. The teller leaned back. "Very necessary," she said. Steven exhaled slowly. The guard stepped closer. "Last warning," he growled. "Leave." Before Steven could respond, a loud voice boomed from behind. "Duortescu an Owen Hera." The branch manager walked in, a heavy-set man in a sharp suit, with loud confidence, the kind of man who treated power like a toy. He didn't ask what happened first. He didn't ask if Steven was okay. He looked at Steven's clothes, and instantly decided his worth. "This bank is not a shelter," the manager snapped. "We don't have time for beggars." Steven's tone stayed calm. "I'm not begging," he said. "I'm withdrawing from my account." The manager laughed loudly. "Your account," he mocked. Then he leaned in closer, voice filled with disgust. "Let me guess you saw rich people and thought you could act important too." The crowd murmured. Some people looked away in shame. Some kept recording. Stephen stood still, silent, watching. Then the manager said the line that crossed the limit. "People like you don't belong in places like this." That sentence hit the room like poison. Stephen's eyes lifted. "People like me?" he asked quietly. The manager smirked. "You heard me." Stephen nodded slowly. This is how humiliation spreads. One person says something disgusting and suddenly others feel, all loud, to treat you like nothing too. And the scariest part, most people stay quiet because they don't want to become the next target. Stephen looked around the bank. He noticed phones recording. He noticed the cameras. Then he looked directly at the manager and said calmly, "Good." The manager frowned.
"Good what?"
Stephen replied, voice steady. "Good that everyone is watching." The manager's smile faded. Stephen added, "Because what you just said will cost you more than you realize." The manager scoffed. "Oh yeah." He pointed at the guard. "Call the police. Let's remove this clown." Stephen didn't resist. He didn't panic. He simply turned his head toward the nearest camera and said softly, "Perfect." Then he looked back at the manager. "I was hoping you'd do that." The guard grabbed Stephen's arm harder this time, and Stephen didn't move. He didn't fight. He just stared at the manager with calm eyes, like a man who had already won. "If you were in that bank, would you defend Stephen or stay silent?" The security guard's hand tightened around Stephen's arm. Not gently, not respectfully, like Stephen was something dirty he wanted to throw away. "Move," the guard hissed. Stephen looked at the grip on his sleeve, then looked up calmly. "Take your hand off me," he said quietly. The guard smirked. "Or what?" Stephen didn't answer. He simply pulled his arm back, not aggressive, not dramatic, just controlled. But the guard still stumbled a step backward like he'd been pushed by something stronger than expected. The crowd gasped. A woman covered her mouth. The manager's eyes widened for a second, then turned into rage. "That's it," the manager shouted. "He's violent." Stephen raised his hand slightly. "I didn't touch him," he said. "He grabbed me." But the manager didn't care about truth. He cared about winning. He turned to the teller. "Call the police." "No." The teller nodded fast, almost excited. "Yes, sir." Stephen stood still, calm as stone. But now the energy in the bank had shifted. People weren't laughing as much anymore, because bullies are only entertaining until they look dangerous. The manager stepped closer to Stephen, voice low and cruel. "You know what you are," he whispered. Stephen stared at him. "You're the kind of man who tries to steal from places he doesn't belong." Stephen replied calmly, "You're wrong." The manager sneered. "I'm never wrong." Then he glanced at Stephen's jacket again. "And you," he laughed. "You look like someone who sleeps in a bus station." A few people chuckled again. Stephen didn't react. Instead, he looked at the people recording and asked calmly, "How are you all hearing this?" The manager snapped, "Stop talking to them." But Stephen continued, "Because this is not about me anymore." The manager's face hardened. "Oh, shut up, you came for money." Stephen nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I came for money." He lifted the withdrawal slip in his hand. "But what I'm seeing here," he looked around the bank, "is a place that treats respect like it's only for rich people." The manager laughed loudly.
"This is a bank, not a therapy center."
Stephen's calm voice didn't change. "And yet you're acting like a bully." That word bully made the manager snap. He stepped closer and shoved Stephen's shoulder. Not hard, but enough to show power. The crowd gasped again. Stephen looked at him.
"Don't touch me,"
Stephen said quietly. The manager smirked. "Or what?" he mocked, repeating the guard's words. Stephen didn't answer. He just stared. The manager's smile faded slightly, because something about Stephen's calm was starting to feel dangerous. Then the manager did something even worse. He snatched the withdrawal slip from Stephen's hand. "Tice," he laughed loudly. "This is your big request." Stephen held out his hand. "Give it back." The manager shook his head like he was performing in a movie. Look at this poor man trying to act important. And then, ripe, he tore the withdrawal slip in half, right in front of everyone. The entire bank went silent, like oxygen left the room. A woman whispered, "Oh my God." Someone in the crowd said, "That's too far." Stephen stared at the torn paper in the manager's hand. He didn't blink. He didn't shout. He didn't swing. He simply lowered his eyes and slowly bent down. He picked up the ripped pieces calmly, like he was collecting evidence. Then he looked up at the manager. "I'm going to remember that," Stephen said softly. The manager laughed. "Remember it?" "What are you going to do?" Stephen replied calmly. "I'm going to show everyone what kind of man you are." The manager's laugh stopped. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The security guard stepped forward again.
"Don't act tough,"
he barked. Stephen looked at him. "I'm not acting tough," Stephen replied. "I'm acting patient." The manager pointed at Stephen like he'd won. "You hear that? He admits it. He's causing a scene." At that moment, sirens, Police sirens, they were coming closer. The manager smiled again. "Oh good," he said. "No, you'll learn consequences." Stephen turned his head toward the entrance calmly. Then he looked back at the manager and said, "Be careful what you ask for." The doors opened. 2 police officers walked in, one young and cocky, the other older, calm, observant. The manager rushed forward instantly. "Officers," he shouted.
Arrest this man.
"He attacked our security and tried to commit fraud." The young officer glanced at Stephen's poor clothing and instantly made up his mind. He walked up fast and grabbed Stephen's wrist. "Turn around," he snapped. Stephen didn't resist, but he spoke calmly. "Before you put cuffs on me," the officer smirked.
Oh yeah, you got something to say.
Stephen looked him in the eyes and asked, "Do you always treat people like criminals? Just because they look poor?" The young officer's smile disappeared. "What did you say?" Stephen repeated, calm and clear. "I asked, do you judge people by their clothes?" The older officer suddenly looked at Stephen's face more carefully. Something felt familiar. His eyes narrowed. He stared harder. Then he whispered under his breath, "No way." This is the moment when a bully realizes the person they mock might not be weak. Sometimes calm isn't fear. Sometimes calm is control. The older officer stepped closer. He looked at Stephen again. Then he looked at the young officer and said quietly, "Hold on." The young officer frowned. "What?" The older officer didn't answer. He just stared at Stephen's face like he had seen it somewhere before. And then he slowly reached for his phone. The older officer typed one name into Google, and his eyes widened. The older police officer's fingers moved fast on his phone. He didn't say a word. He just stared at Stephen, then at the screen, then back at Stephen again. The young officer still had Stephen's wrist in his grip. "Turn around." The young officer demanded again, louder this time, trying to look tough in front of the crowd. Stephen didn't resist, but he didn't obey either. He simply stood still, calm, steady, silent. The manager stepped forward, excited. "You see," he told the police, "he's refusing orders. He's dangerous. Put him in cuffs." The teller nodded along quickly, playing innocent. "Yes, officer, he's been scamming us. He pretended to be Steven Siegel." The security guard added, almost shouting, "And he attacked me." Stephen's eyes moved slowly from face to face. Not angry, not scared, just disappointed. The older officer finally spoke, voice low and serious. Everyone calmed down. The manager laughed nervously. "Officer, trust me." The older officer raised a hand sharp. "See, Amdabalan." That tone instantly changed the atmosphere. Even the manager stopped smiling. The older officer stepped closer to Stephen and stared at his face longer. Stephen's worn jacket, his simple look, his dusty shoes. But the officer wasn't focused on any of that. He was focused on the eyes, the face, the voice, the calm. He cleared his throat. He asked quietly, "What's your full name?" Stephen answered, "Steven Siegel." The young officer laughed loudly.
Man, enough with this,
he mocked. "You really think we're stupid?" The crowd murmured again. Some people still believed it was a scam, but others were beginning to feel uncertain, because Stephen wasn't acting like a scammer. Scammers are nervous. Scammers argue. Scammers beg. Stephen did none of those things. The older officer looked at the young officer. "Let go of him," he ordered. The young officer frowned, surprised. "What, sir?" I said. The older officer repeated firmer, "Let go." Slowly, reluctantly, the young officer released Stephen's wrist. The manager's eyes widened. "Officer, what are you doing?" "He's—" The older officer turned toward the manager, eyes cold. "Sir," he said calmly, "did you verify his account before calling the police?" The manager blinked. "Well, we followed protocol." The older officer interrupted. "It's a yes or no question." The manager stuttered. "No, but he looks." The officer's eyebrows rose sharply. "He looks what?" The manager froze. He didn't want to finish that sentence on camera, because now he realized people were recording everything. The older officer glanced around the lobby, phones held high, lenses pointed at the manager. Then he looked back at Stephen and asked something that made the room freezy. "Sir, are you here because of the board?" The teller's face dropped. The manager's lips opened. "Be bored," he whispered. The young officer stepped forward again, confused. "Board? What board?" The older officer didn't respond. He was still staring at Stephen. Stephen stayed calm. He didn't smile. He didn't flex. He didn't announce anything. Instead, he asked the older officer quietly, "Is this how you treat citizens who look poor, officer?" The older officer swallowed. Something about that question hit him hard. He looked down for half a second like guilt flashed across his face. Then he looked back at Stephen.
No,
he said, honest. "It's not." Stephen nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here?" The manager suddenly snapped, trying to regain control.
Officer, don't let him manipulate you.
He's clearly trying to turn this into some emotional drama. Stephen turned toward the manager. His voice stayed calm. You did this to yourself. The manager's face turned red with anger. I didn't go wrong, he shouted. Stephen stared at him. Then he spoke slowly so everyone heard every word. You denied my withdrawal without verifying. You accused me of fraud without evidence. You dropped my ID like I was garbage. He paused. And then you tore my slip like I was nothing. The manager panicked. That's not what happened. A woman in the crowd suddenly spoke up. That is what happened. The manager whipped around. Shut up. Another man shouted.
We saw everything.
Now voices started rising. People weren't just recording anymore, they were choosing sides. And for the first time, the bank wasn't with the manager. It was with the poor man. The older officer turned toward the manager again. Sir, he said sternly, back away. The manager's mouth fell open.
Back away? Me, officer, this is MY Bank.
The older officer's face hardened. Is it? The manager froze. Stephen finally took a step forward. Not toward the manager, but toward the crowd. He spoke in a calm voice that filled the room. Listen, I didn't come here to fight. I came here for one simple thing. He lifted the torn slip pieces in his hand. My withdrawal. Then he looked around the bank. But I learned something more important. Everyone stayed silent. Stephen continued. This system treats respect like a reward. He looked at the teller. Like you only deserve dignity if you look rich. He looked at the manager. Like you only deserve fairness if you look important. Then Stephen said the sentence that made the crowd feel chills. You should treat people right. He paused. Even when you believe they can't do anything about it. The manager's throat tightened. He stepped back unconsciously. He knew the crowd had turned. He knew the officers were doubting him. And he knew phones were capturing his face. So he did what weak people always do when they lose control. He tried to fix it with fake kindness. He forced a nervous smile. Metri, Mr. Sheagull, he said, trembling. Listen, I apologize, okay? Let's handle this privately. Stephen didn't move. He asked calmly. Privately.
The manager nodded quickly. Yes, privately.
We can sort it out. We can process your request. No need for drama. Stephen replied quietly. You wanted it public when you thought I was nobody. The manager's eyes darted around. Stephen continued. And now you want it private because you're scared. The crowd murmured loudly. The manager's fake smile collapsed. He whispered, Oh, who are you? Stephen didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at the older officer again, and then he looked at the manager and said calmly, Call head office. The manager blinked. What? Stephen repeated, Call head office, and put it on speaker. The manager tried to laugh it off. You don't give orders here. Stephen cut him off with calm authority. Now. That tone felt different. Not loud, not aggressive, but final. The manager's hands began shaking again. He pulled out his phone. But before he dialed, Stephen leaned slightly closer and said the coldest line yet. You should have treated me like a human. He paused. Before you found out who I was. This is the moment every arrogant person fears. Because when you bully someone you think is weak, you're not just disrespecting them. You're exposing yourself. And once the truth comes out, you can't hide behind your suit anymore. The manager finally dialed. His voice shaking, he put it on speaker. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then a voice answered. Regional compliance. The manager swallowed hard. Hello, this is Branch Manager Clark. I need to verify a customer. The voice on the phone responded. Name. The manager looked at Stephen like he was staring at a bomb. Then he whispered. Stephen Siegel. The silence on the phone lasted 1 full second. Then the voice replied, cold and firm. Do not say another word. The manager's body stiffened. The voice continued. Is Mr. Sheagull safe? The manager's eyes widened in horror, because now he understood. This wasn't a scam. This was the end of his career. The voice on speaker said, Do not touch him. We are dispatching audit and the regional director immediately. The manager's phone almost slipped from his hand. The manager stood frozen with the phone still on speaker. The voice from regional compliance was cold, sharp, urgent. Do not touch him. The voice repeated. We are dispatching audit and the regional director immediately. The manager's throat tightened. A audit, he whispered. The compliance voice didn't care about his fear.
Yes.
Audit, stay where you are. Do not speak to him. Do not attempt to remove him. The call ended. The bank went silent. No laughter, no smirks, no fake Stephen Siegel jokes anymore. The teller looked like her blood drained out. The security guard's confidence evaporated. And the young officer, he stared at Stephen like he was suddenly standing in front of a king he didn't recognize. The manager tried to salvage himself in the most pathetic way possible. He forced a shaky smile and stepped toward Stephen. Mr. Sheagull, he said softly. Listen, I sincerely apologize. This was all misunderstanding. Stephen didn't move. He didn't respond immediately. He just stared at the manager, calm eyes, quiet breath. Then he spoke. A misunderstanding, he repeated slowly. The manager nodded quickly, desperate.
Yes, yes.
We didn't know it was you. Stephen's eyes sharpened slightly. Exactly, he said. You didn't know it was me. He paused. And that's why you felt safe doing what you did. The manager opened his mouth, trying to explain. Stephen didn't let him escape. You denied my withdrawal. You accused me of fraud. You dropped my ID, and then you tore my slip like I was trash. Stephen's voice never rose, but every word landed heavier than a punch. The manager's face twisted in panic. I swear it wasn't personal. Stephen nodded. I know. It wasn't personal. He looked around the bank. It was habit. That sentence hit the manager like a truck. Because Stephen was right. The way he treated Stephen wasn't special. It was normal for him. The older officer stepped forward and looked at the manager. Sir, he said stern, you need to calm down and step back. The manager stuttered.
Officer, please. You don't understand. This is going to destroy me.
Stephen finally turned to the crowd. He lifted the torn withdrawal slip pieces. You all saw it, he said calmly. And the most painful part isn't what they did. He looked around at faces watching. It's how confident they were doing it. People murmured. A woman whispered, that's true. A man nodded slowly, angry. Stephen looked at one teenager filming. Keep recording, Stephen said quietly. The manager flinched. He knew why. Because the story was no longer inside the bank. It was already leaving. It was going online. And it was going to spread like fire. Stephen turned back toward the manager. I'm not here to hurt you, Stephen said calmly. The manager looked relieved for half a second. Then Stephen continued. I'm here to stop you. The manager's relief vanished. He whispered. Stephen nodded.
Yes.
Because if you treated me like this, he paused. How many normal people have you crushed before me? The manager's lips trembled. The teller began crying again. Please, she whispered. We didn't mean it. Stephen turned to her, calm but firm. You didn't mean it, but you did it. The teller broke down. Stephen looked at the security guard. You grabbed me because you thought I was powerless, Stephen said. The guard swallowed hard. I was just doing my job, Stephen replied coldly. No, you were doing what you thought you could get away with. The guard lowered his eyes. Then Stephen turned to the young officer. The officer stiffened. Stephen asked him calmly, when you walked in, did you look at my face first? The officer hesitated. Stephen followed up. Or did you look at my clothes first? The young officer had no answer, because the truth was obvious. Stephen nodded slowly. Exactly, he said. This is what happens when society trains people to judge value by appearance. The poor get treated like criminals. The rich get treated like royalty. And the most dangerous part, most people don't even realize they're doing it. Outside the bank, a sound of engines rolled in. Customers turned their heads. Through the glass doors, 2 black cars pulled up slowly. Then a third, clean, expensive, official. The manager's eyes widened in terror. He whispered, no. The older officer looked outside and straightened his posture immediately. The bank doors opened again. A man in a sharp suit stepped in first. Then a woman holding a tablet and files. Then an older gentleman with authority in every step. The regional director, and behind them, 2 serious-looking audit people. Every employee in the bank stood up instantly like a school classroom when the principal enters. The manager rushed forward like a drowning man. Director, he cried. Please, let me explain. The regional director walked past him. Didn't even glance at him. Straight toward Stephen. He stopped in front of Stephen, respectful. Mr. Siegel, he said clearly. The entire lobby gasped. Stephen nodded. The regional director turned toward the audit lead. Begin the review. Immediately. The audit lead nodded coldly. First thing, he announced, camera footage. The manager's knees weakened. The director looked at the manager for the first time with disgust. Mr. Clark, he said quietly. The manager tried to speak. Sir. The director cut him off. You're done. The manager's mouth fell open. Stephen looked at the manager calmly and said the final knife. This is what happens. When you mistake a poor look for a poor life, the audit lead raised his tablet and said, We've already found something. The manager whispered, terrified. What did you find? And the director replied coldly, enough to end you. What should happen now? Should Stephen let them fire the manager, or should he force him to face the customers he humiliated? Comment? The audit lead held up his tablet like a weapon. We've already found something, he repeated. The manager's face went pale. What did you find? He stuttered. The regional director didn't blink. Enough to end you. The manager shook his head fast, like denial could save him.
No, that's impossible. I've run this branch for years.
Stephen stood quietly beside them, still wearing the faded jacket. still looking like a man nobody would respect. And that contrast made the moment even more powerful. The regional director turned toward the bank staff. "Everyone step away from your desks," he ordered. The teller stood up trembling. The security guard backed away without speaking. The manager tried to smile again, weak, desperate. "Sir, listen, let me explain. This is all just a misunderstanding. A minor conflict." The audit lead cut him off. "This isn't minor." He tapped his tablet. "Your branch has 16 complaints in the last 90 days. The manager froze. The crowd gasped. 16? Someone whispered. The audit lead looked up, voice firm. Complaints flagged for discrimination, humiliation of customers, illegal denials, and suspicious fee patterns. The manager's eyes widened like someone punched him. "That's a lie," he shouted. "People complain when they don't get their way." Stephen finally spoke, soft, calm. "And how many of those people looked poor?" Stephen asked. The manager snapped toward him. "This is not about poor," he screamed. Stephen didn't flinch. "That's the problem," Stephen replied. "You still don't get it." The compliance officer stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Mr. Clark," she said coldly, "we've traced repeated account holds placed on low-income customers. Many were forced to return multiple times for withdrawals." The crowd murmured louder now. A woman spoke up. "That happened to my father." All heads turned. The woman stepped forward, angry. "My dad worked his whole life, and your staff treated him like trash. You denied his withdrawal twice?" The manager tried to wave her off. "Ma'am, I don't know you." But the woman pointed at him, voice shaking with anger. "You don't remember because you do it to everyone." Another customer stepped forward. "And you charged me a processing fee for no reason." Another man shouted. "You humiliated me in front of my kids." The bank erupted into voices, not screaming truth. The regional director raised his hand. "Enough," he commanded. The crowd slowly calmed. Then the audit lead said, "Let's play the footage." He connected the tablet to the lobby screen. The large screen turned on, and suddenly the entire bank watched itself. First clip, the teller laughing. "This doesn't match your profile." Then clip. The manager's voice loud and disgusting.
"This bank isn't a shelter."
Then clip. The security guard grabbing Stephen's collar. Then the worst clip. The manager ripping the withdrawal slip. Rep. The sound echoed through speakers like a gunshot. The crowd gasped again. The teller covered her mouth. The manager stood there, staring at the screen like his soul was leaving his body. Even the young officer looked uncomfortable now. The regional director's face turned cold with disgust. He pointed at the screen. "This," he said, voice shaking with anger, "is unacceptable." The compliance officer typed quickly. "Documenting everything," she said. The manager's legs gave out. He stumbled back. No, this is being taken out of context." Stephen turned toward him. "Context." Stephen said calmly. "You insulted a man you thought was poor. What context makes that okay?" The manager's lips trembled. He tried begging now. "Mr. Seagull, please, you're a good man. I know you are. Please don't destroy my career." Stephen looked at him calm as ever. "I'm not destroying your career," Stephen replied. He paused. "You did." The manager began crying.
"I have kids."
Stephen nodded slowly. "And so did the man you humiliated last month," Stephen said. The manager froze. Stephen continued quietly. "And the woman whose father you denied. And the man you embarrassed in front of his family." Stephen's voice stayed calm, but the words were brutal because they were true. The regional director stepped forward. "Mr. he said coldly. "You are suspended effective immediately." The manager's eyes widened.
"No, please."
The director added, "Pending termination and legal review." The manager collapsed on his knees. The teller started crying harder. The security guard stood motionless, like he wanted to vanish. The young officer swallowed and stepped back. Stephen looked around the bank at everyone watching. Then he spoke to the crowd. "This is not revenge," Stephen said. "This is correction." He walked toward the lobby desk slowly. Then he turned back to the compliance officer. "One more thing," Stephen said. The compliance officer looked up. "Yes, sir." Stephen's eyes moved across the employees. "I want a policy change," he said. "A dignity policy." The crowd went silent again. The director nodded immediately. "Yes, Mr. Siegel." Stephen continued. "Every denial must be documented. Every complaint must be investigated within 24 hours. And every employee here," he looked at the teller, "will be trained, not on banking, on respect. This is what true power looks like. Not shouting, not hitting, not humiliating back. True power changes the system, so the next victim doesn't suffer again." Stephen looked at the manager one last time. "You denied me my withdrawal, but today, you gave the world a lesson." The regional director turned to Stephen. "Sir," he asked respectfully, "what do you want done with this branch now?" Stephen paused, then said, "Today we rebuild it." Should Stephen shut this branch down completely, or keep it open but with new staff. The bank felt like it had been stripped naked. No more fake smiles, no more arrogance, no more power games, just truth. The regional director stood beside Stephen like a student beside a teacher. "Sir," he asked respectfully, "what do you want done with this branch now?" Stephen looked around. The teller was crying. The security guard stared at the floor. The manager was still on his knees, broken, and the customers, they weren't laughing anymore. They weren't even angry anymore. They looked relieved. Because for once in their lives, someone powerful had actually listened. Stephen took a slow breath. Then he said calmly, "Today we rebuild it." The director nodded instantly. "Yes, sir." Stephen continued, voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "This branch will stay open, but not like this." He turned to the compliance officer. "I want a new program announced today." The compliance officer's fingers flew across her tablet. "Name?" she asked. Stephen paused, then said he, "The Dignity Program." The bank went silent. Stephen explained, starting immediately. Any customer denied service must receive a written reason. Any complaint must be reviewed in 24 hours. And there will be random audits every month. The director added quickly, "All staff will be retrained. New leadership will be appointed." Stephen nodded. Then he looked at the customers. "And one more thing," he said. Everyone leaned in. Stephen's voice softened a little. "If you ever see someone being humiliated in public," he paused, "don't just record it. Don't just whisper. Stand beside them." Some customers nodded, emotional. A middle-aged man stepped forward and said quietly, "Thank you for doing what nobody does." A woman held her phone with shaking hands. "My father passed away," she whispered, voice breaking. "He faced this kind of treatment his whole life." Stephen looked at her gently. "I'm sorry," he said. Then he added calmly, "That's exactly why I didn't come here as a celebrity." That sentence hit the crowd deeply. Stephen continued, "I dressed like this on purpose." The director blinked. The teller looked up. Stephen looked around at everyone watching. "I wanted to see how this bank treats a person. When they yank, he has no power." The crowd gasped softly. Stephen nodded slowly. "And you gave me the answer." He turned toward the manager on the floor. "You didn't deny me a withdrawal," Stephen said calmly. "You denied basic human respect." The manager cried harder. I'm sorry." Stephen stared at him. Then he said something unexpected. "I believe you're sorry," Stephen said. "But being sorry doesn't erase what you did." He looked at the director. "Make sure he faces consequences." The director nodded. "Yes, sir." Outside the bank, people had gathered. Phones were raised. News vans were pulling in, because the footage was already everywhere. That same night, the video exploded online. Millions of views, millions of comments.
Respect costs nothing. Never judge by clothes.
This is the lesson the world needs. Power should protect people, not humiliate them. And the bank, it issued a public statement. Policy changes announced. The manager removed. New training introduced. The branch became an example of what not to be, and what to become. Stephen stood at the bank doors, ready to leave. Still in that faded jacket, still looking like a poor man. And before stepping out, he turned back one last time and said, "A poor jacket doesn't mean a poor heart. And a rich suit," he paused, "doesn't mean a rich character." The crowd erupted into applause. Stephen nodded once, then walked out quietly. That's why what Stephen did next changed everything. Because he didn't just withdraw money. He withdrew arrogance from the system. He didn't fight with fists. He fought with truth. If you believe every human deserves respect, no matter how they look, type "Raspati" in the comments. And subscribe for more powerful fictional stories like this. Because the next story might change everything again.